let's get started. So the idea today is someone submitted a question about how to modify an existing SVG, but it was more than a modification. They wanted to add certain features, and so I think this would be answering this question would be like a good sort of case study on how to make something with something you might have purchased or that you made in another software, but you can use Kotlin to add certain things and then make the design process a little bit easier by incorporating some parameters. So here is my dashboard. I'm gonna create a new project by clicking the plus. So I'm gonna call this one necklace. And let me show you the SVG that Karen submitted. So I'm going to import an existing SVG. So I'm going to go to File and then Import. And I have this one in the Downloads folder. So I just have that one. So I'm going to open that. And here it is. So let me resize this inspector window. And so here's what we're going to be doing to this one. The idea is that the main design here without the letters is going to be engraved. And then we need to add a cut that goes just around the outline. But we also want to cut these inside holes, like here in between the these kind of lightning bolts and the laurel. There is this hole. So we want to make sure that that's a hole. That's like part of the design intent. And then additionally, we might want to add like a hole for hanging or a couple of holes for making it into a necklace. So I know there was someone else asked a few weeks ago about making a necklace, so this might cover some of those ideas. So I'm gonna get started here with, if I look at the inspector, I get just one group that incorporates everything. So I'm going to start by getting rid of the letters. So I'm going to right click here and then ungroup that. So that just gives me a bunch of paths. I don't need to think too hard about this for now. I'm just going to select, Windows select the letters and hit the delete key to get rid of those. And then I'm going to get all these and hit the delete key again to get rid of those. And what I'm left with is this compound path. I'll give you a quick explanation of what a compound path is. So the other thing I want to do is sort of move these to the center. So I guess I don't know, to be more precise, I'm going to grab a circle and then I'm going to select everything to get these little icons that allow me to center the two shapes together. So that was just like a quick way for me to figure out that the center is right here. So I'm going to select everything and grab it from that point and bring it to the center of the canvas. A weird hack I just did. I'm going to delete that initial circle. And then when I select this group, I notice that the center, the origin, is like over here. So I'm just going to move that. I'm going to hold the command key, which exposes the origin or the transform center. And I'm going to move it to the center of the canvas, so the origin. So that was the first thing I did. Then the next thing I want to do is, I think I want to scale it because right now this is 11 inches by 6.29 inches. And that's pretty big for a necklace. I'm thinking like it needs to be a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to scale it down to something more reasonable. I'm going to guess something, let's see, I guess about 1.5 inches in height. We can do more scaling later, but this is a good start. So the idea with a compound path is that I'm going to explain it over here. So sometimes you have like multiple paths, something like these. And if you if you haven't done any operations, if you add a fill to this whole thing, then it just gets obscured. But let's say some paths kind of use the inside holes as actual holes. So in this example, if I select these and then I kind of convert it to create compound path. Now, if I apply the fill, you'll see that anything that's inside immediately turns into a hole. Meaning, if I were to cut these, this gets cut as a hole. So this path that we got here is one of those. It's one of those where like it's composed of many different paths, but whatever is sort of inside other paths turns into a hole. So that's just something to know. I'm going to delete this example. And so at this point, we kind of have the option of like taking these and turning it into a group of regular paths, which I'm going to do. Let's see what that does. So there is an option here that creates or releases the compound path. And so if I release it, I end up with a bunch of different paths, which is acceptable. But actually, no, that doesn't work for me right now because I actually want to leave this entire thing as an engrave. So I kind of undid that operation. So I'm going to leave it as a compound path. I'm going to just change the fill so that becomes my engraving. So I don't have to do a lot of work there. So I'm going to call that component the engraving. And then I'm just going to kind of reuse that component to create the outline that I want. So I'm going to create another one that I'm going to call the outside cut. And I'm going to bring that engraving here onto the center. So I'm kind of reusing that component. And to this one, I'm going to do some operations. So the first thing I want to do is I want to sort of extract the inside cuts. And in order to do that, I'm going to use, I think the most intuitive way I kind of figured out how to do this is to use the flatten modifier. So if I go into, these, let me see. I got the engrave, I'm going to leave that one. I got the outside cut here. Actually, this one I'm going to convert to paths. So I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to convert everything to paths, and which kind of brings me back to that compound path. But now I'm actually going to go into this compound path and see if I can actually double click into it. So it creates this kind of like focus mode. And if I kind of hover over all these different outlines, I can see that I can see this outside, the complete outside outline is a single path. And then if I hover over the others, I can see that the inside hole here also gets highlighted. So I'm going to do this thing where I select the outside path and I'm going to give that one a fill. So it kind of blanks everything out. And that's going to give me that outside cut. And then if I hover over here and find this one, I'm going to turn that one into, I'm going to give it a white fill. So this way I can sort of visually figure out what it's going to turn into a hole. So I'm selecting that other one. I'm going to give it a white fill as well. And I actually need to release that compound path. So as you can see now, I have these kind of marked out as holes, and I have the outside marked out as like my overall shape. And I think that's pretty much what I want. So I'm going to select everything, and then I'm going to apply this modifier called flatten. So the cool thing about this modifier is that anything that I marked as white is going to turn into a hole, and everything else is just turns into a shape. If I, while selecting flatten, I click this one that says stroke result, you'll see that the stroke result that I get is the complete outline on the outside. So just to explain, I did really quick, but I'm gonna kind of try to explain again the flatten operation real fast. So the flatten operation is kind of like you don't have to think too hard about what you're subtracting or what you're adding. You kind of do it visually. So anything that has a fill, it just kind of gets added. So if this circle has also the same fill, that those two shapes are gonna get added. If this also has the same fill, importantly, that's gonna get added. But if I make anything else, we would use white. I'm gonna make this one white. That's gonna get subtracted. And if I make that white, that's gonna get subtracted. So it's a very visual way of sort of building up your shapes. And so in order to make it work, I select all the shapes and then I apply the flatten modifier. And so it immediately created that shape that I needed. So let's click the stroke result. So this is like a way of constructing shapes out of other shapes. And in this case, in the way that we did it here, we just took existing shapes and we kind of selected the ones that we wanted to apply, the one that we wanted to be a hole and the one that we wanted to be the outline. So that solves that particular problem of creating the outline, the sort of outline with the specific holes. And so in order to cut that, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna create another component. I'm gonna call it the final cut. And so into that component, I'm gonna drag the operation that's the engraving, and then I'm gonna grab the outside cut. And just to make it more clear, I'm gonna keep that stroke result selected. And so it's not quite visible here, but I know that the outside cut, I want it to be red. And so I can see how, if I zoom in, you'll see that the outside cut is red and then the engraving is black. The additional thing I wanted to do to this one was add like a little hole for a necklace. So let's do that. And we're gonna also use flatten to add that. So let's see. The idea here is that, one option would be to add a hole right here on the top. But let's go with what the user requested, what Karen requested, which was like to put it here as so it's on both sides. So I'm gonna make use of that same flatten modifier in the following way. So when I select a circle, I'm gonna change. I can sort of select the scale of that hole to be exactly the scale of the hole that I want. And then we want that hole to be surrounded by some material to stay in place. So I'm gonna make that into the stroke. So I'm gonna uncheck this hairline option because that's the one we kind of use for cuts. And so that gives me the stroke around the circle. But the alignment of the stroke is right on the center, which kind of obliterates my inside circle. So I'm gonna change the alignment to be on the outside. So as you can see how that changes. If it's centered, the stroke is right on the center of the path. If it's on the outer, that retains the inside diameter of the hole while giving me this thickness that I wanted. I'm gonna change this color to gray. So I can see that visually, this is what I'm going for. I might want to change the width of that a little bit to just make it more balanced. And then in order to, I'm just gonna mirror it to the other side. So we have two. So I'm gonna select that, edit, modifier, and then mirror repeat. So that's just gonna mirror it on this side. And then to finish it off, I just need to include those circles inside of the group that has been flattened. So the easy way to do that is to, here in the inspector, I'm just gonna grab it, put it inside the group. And hopefully now if I select flatten and stroke result, yeah, so that's kind of like what I want. And that should be reflected in my final cut over here. So that's pretty much what was requested, but I think we could make it a little bit better. And so one thing I thought would be interesting is that, I don't know, sometimes if you engrave something and then cut right on the outside of that, it might be too close. So I was thinking it'd be nice to just make the cut a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna go back to that cut here. And I'm gonna be kind of choosy in the way I do this because I'll show you why. So I think I want the outside to be expanded a little bit, but if I expand those inside holes, then they're just gonna kind of overlap over my engraving. So I'm gonna go ahead and like select that outside path that is right here, and I'm gonna expand it by a little bit. So I'm gonna say modify and expand. That's a lot. Let's see how that reflected in the final. Yeah, that's like too much. So then I'm gonna reduce it to make something more what I was intending to do. So I think something like that. I think one nice thing you can do is that the joints could be round. So I'm going to select the joints round. That kind of is very subtle, but like it will kind of make some corners look better. So the default is miter. So look at this corner over here. That's like kind of spiky, but if I make it round, kind of rounds it nicely. It makes it look a little better. And then for those inside ones, they actually need to be contracted. Because if I were to expand it, actually I should show you what that looks like. So I'm going to select that one and that one. So they're right next to each other. I'm actually going to group them. So look, if I select expand, I should just show you to see what happens. It just kind of goes over and overlaps, and that's not what I want. So I want to do the opposite. I want to contract it. So I'm going to delete that expand. I'm going to modify it and contract it, or inset it. That was again too much. And so I think I want that to be the same amount. So meaning the outside gets expanded by a certain amount and the inside gets contracted by the same amount. And so that's kind of like where there are two different operations, but we can use the same parameter, the same number. So one thing I can do is go here to the expand, and I can extract this distance as a parameter. I'm gonna click the three dots, extract as parameter. So that's the offset distance. I'm gonna just call it something that I can understand. That immediately gets renamed. So now that is changing that. That looks good. And I want that same distance to apply to the contract. So in that case, I'm kind of taking these, and imagine that I'm kind of pulling a little cable and plugging it in here by writing here offset distance. And so now, yeah, that's kind of like what I was looking for. Now you see that it kind of makes sense. It makes more sense if I look at it here. But now that, I want to make that parameter apply to everything in the project. So I'm actually going to move it to be move parameter to project. So that just kind of makes it so it's visible everywhere. And then it applies to anything. So here, I can just kind of add it, and that looks pretty cool. I might have to cut these and send it to the laser to see how it works. And then the next thing I would want to do is probably, that necklace hole is kind of like being intruded by this little corner. So I kind of want an easy way to move it around, because one way to move it around, if I don't want to mess around too much, is I can kind of double click into it, and then I double click into it so it goes into the group. So then I can kind of move it here, And because I applied that mirror modifier, it's going to apply to the one on the right. So that's kind of like a nice way of figuring out that, say I want it over here. So that could be sufficient. But another way in which I could do it is I could go into that circle, and I know if I select it, there is this position. So I could kind of turn that into a parameter. So extract it as parameter. I'm going to move it to be a project parameter, and then this is the whole position. And if I go to the final cut, then I now have that offset distance to do some changes to that. And then I have this position, so I can kind of move it around just by moving the numbers. I mean, that might or might not be easier, but hopefully that makes sense. But I think the idea I wanted to convey was that sometimes you can work on a design, and the nature of laser cutting is that you make the design and you want to cut it and test it, test to see how it works, or you just want to look at it on the screen and just kind of move things around. But like one easy way to do this is creating these parameters. I mean, it takes like a little upfront effort to just make them happen. But once they're there, you can sort of do all these like quick changes to sort of iterate or like try different things. So this is the way I would kind of set this one up to create that. I think I probably need to round the corners of the inside one too. So I can go back in here and I select that contract, probably a rounded corner. It didn't make a huge difference, but it's a very small cut. So yeah, that's hopefully that answers the questions. I won't be sharing this particular file because the SVG is not mine. I'll share it with Karen, but no. So if you have any questions about this one, you can let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thanks a lot for coming. I think the last thing I want to do is that Ralph also sent a file the way he modified it in the Facebook comments. Thank you for doing that. And he added another option. He added an option to have a hole here on the top. So I think it's worthwhile going into that one because it's kind of a way of reusing elements that we created, but just creating a different version. And since we have all the elements like set up there, then why not create a different version? So I think the different version I would create would be something like these. I'm gonna create a new component. Oh, my face is on the way. I'm moving myself a little bit down. Oop, not down. So I'm going to create a new component by clicking the plus. And so this would be the one with the, I'm going to call it a top hole. So we're going to reuse that engraving because that's the one we created. But then instead of this outside cut, I want to make some changes to that one. But I don't want to like mess around with it too much. So I'm just going to duplicate it. So I can duplicate that by clicking the 3 dots here. So now I have one that I'm going to call the top hole. So this is going to use, I named this one the top hole too. But I'll call it top hole cut. Not the nicest naming conventions, but so this is a quick change, which I'm mostly going to do here in the inspector. So the circle in that case doesn't get a mirror repeat. So I'm going to delete that. And then the circle actually I don't want to use that position anymore. I'm actually going to reset that. So revert it to the default. That just kind of moved it to the center. So then I can just change the position of that particular thing to go like here. That is centered. Looks good. And if I click out of that, all the other operations we did should also immediately apply. So not particularly painful. So I can go back to my cut, and then what I want for the outline is going to be that top. And then the other thing I did to that one is I made it red. Just to be... So yeah, without a lot of trouble, I kind of created two versions, and the offset distance still applies to that one. And so that was like an example of just kind of reusing stuff I already created to have the two versions. I can even like, sorry, not that one. I could even have the two versions cut side by side if I drag them into another canvas. There they are. The offset distance applies to both if I want to. The hold position currently only applies to the necklace one, but you could do something similar for this one. And then when you're ready, you can always just go to File and export it as an SVG and cut it. Cool. So I think that was another example of modifying SVGs in Cuddle. It's about 1:30, so I'm going to go. And thank you so much for watching. The video will be available on Facebook, and I'll upload it to YouTube later too. Okay. Bye, everyone.